Hayley. What was your research undertaken important to complete your work?
It helped me to explore more options for art pieces and to get more inspiration. Originally I chose, at the beginning of the kaupapa, I chose to try and develop art pieces before going and investigating the Purakau, which was stupid. But once I realised that I wasn't getting anywhere with that, I decided to go back and actually investigate the Purakau that I wanted to work on, and I chose not necessarily a Purakau, but I chose to research Hineki Te Hue, which is the maiden of the Hue, to try and get more information about her. And it was really hard to find a specific Purakau about her, or a specific event, or a specific thing that she did to create or to help me generate Purakau or pieces of her. So I decided to, because of the time limit that we had, to go to Hine Titama and Hine Nui, which I always like working on. I like that story in itself, and through that process I really learned a lot more about Hine Nui, who is generally regarded as something quite dark and something to be feared of. So that in itself helped me generate and develop other ideas for actual art pieces. So it was really important because I was kind of stuck without that sort of research component, sort of just not really developing anything new, and nothing kind of sort of just relying on the old ideas that you had or something like that. So it was me. It was cool.
Why was it important to collect?
Just gave me an opportunity to compare other versions of the same story, and to maybe pick out a specific part of the story that I wanted to focus on, rather than just having a general idea of the story and sort of trying to use that as a means of motivation to develop the pieces. So by collecting the information, I was able to sort of just focus on a specific part of the story and develop art pieces from that, rather than taking the story on as a whole.
So why was it important to care for the information?
I didn't really care for it per se. I think I just tried to validate the information that I got by backing it up with other sources of information. So making sure that I was trying to stay as true to the legend as I possibly could with the information that I had around me. So I guess that's the way I cared for information, by trying to make sure that what I was using was, validated.
What processes did you go through in order to gather information?
Initially I was looking through Margaret Orwell quite a lot, and that was the best. When I was initially researching the Hue, and once I found that there wasn't enough information on her, I googled the Hine Titama story, just to get a starting point, because part of the process is having to retell it. So I just googled that and got the Māori.org website and took their version of and then went about trying to compare it with some of the more written textbooks like Margaret or Galo and what they had. I think I looked through Alistair Best as well to see what he had written on the kaupapa. And then just wrote anecdotes about each of the things that were different, maybe the stories that I found. Just things like names. I think on the Māori.org website it was Tane, it wasn't Tane Mahuta, it was Tane Huta, or Tane, it was slightly different, and I was trying to find in the textbooks why they've referred to him as a different Tane, and then in the textbooks it's always Tane Mahuta, so that was one of the processes that I went through to suss out more about the story and the characters in it.
And what were the pros of the process?
Just actually going through and taking the time to research the story and to, I guess, get an adult version of the story, because you sort of have heard those myths and legends before as kids. Not so much the Hine Titama, but Hine Nui Sipo, so actually getting an adult perspective of the kōrero and seeing more themes in the story.
So, what were the pros of your process?
Just becoming more informed about Hine Titama, but in particular Hine Nui Sipo, about what her actual role is and what it is about, because I think I had quite a general perspective of her in terms of when you think of Hine Nui Sipo, you think of scary, the child was scary, quite dark, quite heartless. That's kind of impression you got of her just from reading those Maori stories that you had at school and stuff. So that was a nice thing to develop, was a better opinion of Hine Nui Sipo.
And what were the cons?
Not having enough time, or not having more time to do more research. Like I said, I started off with Hine Putehue, but it obviously was going to take me a lot longer than what we had to dig more into her. So I sort of had to switch to Hine Nui Sipo because of that.
And how did you make the decisions about what information was relevant to your work?
Well, initially it was what was available, what information was available, and then looking through it and seeing what part of the story I actually wanted to focus on. And I guess it was similar to a lot of other people, and I chose the transition side of Hine Titama to Hine Nui Sipo. I think mainly because last year I did, my work was based around death, a lot of it, and it was quite dark, and I saw this as an opportunity to bring in perhaps the lighter side of death that is there, because there's always an opposite, the dark side and the light side. So yeah, I used that information to help me, all those feelings that I had, to help me choose that particular part of the story.
Yeah.
So I wanted to focus on hue, obviously, as everybody knows, the hue lady in class. So I had originally planned to do 3 different types of hue. Do some quite organic looking ones, and then I had an idea of doing a hebel one, and I think I had an idea to do something else. 3 completely different materials, but due to time and conditions in the classroom, I decided to leave the hebel one until I could work outside in the normal ventilated world, because our classroom was a bit stuffy. Anyway, so I had been working on this one for ages, and decided that I wanted to do elements inside the story rather than tell the story with the implements. I wanted to pick different things inside the story to demonstrate in my art. So I chose 2 hue and to do a painting.
And what did you want to express out of your first one?
Well, the first one was, this was started back in term 1 when we first got the Dremel, and I was experimenting with it. But what I ended up wanting to achieve was, because one of the uses for hue was to carry an afterbirth, and originally this was a broken hue, so I thought that I could trim and make this sort of a half cut hue to catch an afterbirth, and for an afterbirth to be held in it. But then I had an idea to make a string bowl, a hue out of string, and so I started making that, which was this part. And then on its completion, I thought, oh, I wonder if it would fit in here to make a bowl, or to hold it, you know, sort of to complete that shape, and it did. So, and it looked quite cool. It kind of gave the impression of a worm or something inside a worm, because of the clear fibres there around the PVA glue. So I thought, oh, that's kind of goes with what I'm trying to do, which is to create sort of a wormy kind of afterbirth kind of feeling. So, which is kind of cool, because on the outside, I scratched in with a Dremel gel over the black lacquer spray paint, and got all these nice shaded colours underneath the black paint, which kind of gives you the impression of something being created, because there's not sort of one tone under it. There's lots of different colour effects, and I kind of reflected back to a piece that that Opita did, where he sort of created a worm, and it was made up of all these different colours, so that kind of gave me that whakaaro to go along with this. So this is my afterbirth slash worm slash slash and I chose to use just a simple pattern here, but repeated over and over again in a juxtaposition, which means to, so I had worked, through this project I had worked on a few different ideas, and so nothing seemed to be working to the point where I wanted it to be. So I was mucking around with the Dremel gel on this piece and a couple of other broken off pieces of this, and started to I had done some experiments on this part back at the start of the year, and decided to sort of, that I liked the effect, and so I went back to it and then started to cover this whole part with that simple motif. I really liked it, so I decided to continue that idea as a spiral up the whole hue. I had done this part using a wooden, one of those wood block cutting tools, and just scratched that off by hand, but it's quite labour intensive. And then once I figured out the Dremel, use of the Dremel, I kind of worked my way up, and it ended up being quite cool. And I think I already spoke about that part there. Yep, so that part was made out of Galo and string and PVA glue. I've done that at work over another hui that I cut in half. I put it on the bowl part of it and just wound the string around it and then took it off and then thought that it would look cool on here. It did, so that's this one. Yep. Oh, the cons was trying to figure out how I can do this without having to cut that. So haven't quite figured that out yet, how I can make another one. And trying to find a mould that I can do that I can take it off quite easily. So, is that a con? Yeah, that's a con. The pros was, this is by far my favourite piece. I think just because as I was doing it, it was nice to see, because I totally forgotten what colours were under the black. So as I done each section, like I started off there and it was red, and then I did the green, and as I worked my way around the piece, you know, it was revealing different colours, which was really cool. Because it kind of gives that feeling of blood and birthing, kind of like a bloody feeling. And then as you work your way around it, there's sort of signs of life through the different colours that are coming through the black. So that's that little piece there. This is my favourite. This part took ages with the Dremel. I think that was just because I was figuring out how hard to use it, how fast to have it on. And then by the time I've done that, all these parts worked quite fast. And I went through three Dremel pieces to complete it. Okay.
Would you do anything differently?
No, not really. I think maybe try doing this part again. Experimenting more with the PVA glue and string effect, just to get it a bit more perfect, or how I wanted it to sit as a bowl. So yeah, maybe that part. But I still quite like it because the plan is for not to be able to see that join, and you can't really see it once it's all in its place. So yeah.
What would you do next if you had to do a series?
Probably just maybe do more series with just the PVA glue and experimenting with effects that I could create with that. And maybe just do some more series of just the scratched in, the black over different colours and scratched it in.
Did you choose to do that medium, and what did you want to express?
I chose this one because I planned to do a series of hui. And when I was given this one, it sort of lent itself to keeping it quite organic and real, compared to my previous one where it was quite modern looking. I wanted to be a little bit more organic with the way that I approached this one, and try to keep it a little bit more true to what I had seen with previous hui. To give an ancient effect, I don't know if that makes sense, give an ancient effect to it. And I chose the symbol, or this pattern of a mokomoko, or tuatara, or whatever you want to call it, a lizard, because that's quite significant in Hinenu Tupoa. That's something that I always remember about Hinenu Tupoa, was the lizard slithering up inside her. So it goes back to my korero about wanting to pick different elements from the story to express on the hui, and so that was one of them.
What were the pros and cons of choosing that piece?
Pros was definitely the outcome. That this was sort of one of the first out of the three of the pieces, this was the first one that I completed, and that was because things worked well. Like I used a wood burner tool to do all this, and initially I had just planned to do just an outline, just some line drawings with it of the moko moko, but it sort of didn't look right. It looked a little bit scratched. I don't know, just didn't look how I wanted it to look. So mucking around with the burner, I actually burnt a part. I think it was over here somewhere on one of the arms where I was trying to do some shading. It was here. Trying to do some shading with it, and thought, oh, actually that looks quite cool. I'll carry that idea on over the whole piece, which gave me that nice outcome. The cons were not having enough where to practice on to try different things. So trying to create the piece without, it was sort of, I felt like I was doing it blind because I hadn't had puer really hard to source, so being able to practice my ideas on it before actually completing the piece was kind of challenging. So I wanted to make sure I was getting the effect that I wanted to, but so I had to just sort of do it and try and work with what I had without any practice. So,
Did you do anything differently?
no, not on completion. I thought I might like to try and put a colour wash over it, but probably not now that I've seen the finished product.
What would you do next if you could do a series of them?
Probably experiment more, try different effects, like maybe sanding parts of the background down, so getting rid of the hard crust on the outside, or that crusty part on the outside, to reveal the nice shiny shell. Maybe try bits of that. Yeah, I don't know, probably just try different things with the effects of the shell, different shells. Yeah.
So did you want to explain this piece?
Yeah, so it was becoming more and more obvious to me that time was going to be a factor in completing the project, so I reverted back to something that I can work with quite fast and I have a bit more background knowledge on, which was the painting on canvas. And I also wanted to do a what do you call it? My own interpretation of what Hinenui would look like, both as Hinetitama and Hinenui. I know that she's quite bright, while the shades and the golds that I've used, I wanted to that to represent Hinetitama, but also on the different angles of light, she's quite dark, so depending on what angle of light you look at her from, she can either be shimmering or she can either be dark and dull, and that's the kind of effect that I wanted to give for her. The challenging part to this piece was the body and proportions. That's always been a weakness, is making sure that everything is in proportion. So I really wanted to work hard at trying to make her look as realistic in a human form as possible. Other than the bust area, that's a little bit exaggerated. I think it's pretty good in terms of proportion. I wanted something quite dramatic, and I wanted that to be shown through her hair. That whole woman walking down the wind tunnel kind of effect. So I paid a lot of attention to the hair to make sure that the hair was had a lot of movement and it had a feeling of wind blowing off her face, which is why I sort of paid a lot of attention to her hair and stuff.
Pros and cons for doing the painting?
Pros is that I find it easier to work in paint sometimes in terms of time. Cons was the actual subject, choosing the human forms of paint. That was a difficult component for me, and I chose to do that to give me something challenging in the painting. Otherwise, it sort of just becomes, sort of something off the top of your head. So I really wanted her to be seen as, the challenge for me was to make sure she's still seen as somebody quite approachable, in terms of, is she still a caring person and stuff like that. And I wanted to make her beautiful, because I've always thought of both of them as beautiful maidens. And I wanted to make her sensual. Is that the word? Sensual? Like hot mama kind of thing. Sensual in terms of her body, her hair. She's kind of somebody you want to have and you want to be. And obviously she was like that. She had that appeal to her father and also to her husband.
Would you do anything differently?
Probably her bust area. I'd change that. Maybe her face. But again, I tend to have. I tend to leave things unfinished for quite a while. Not just this particular project, but a lot of other projects that I do. Because it gives me time to process what's going on the piece. And so I've done the same here. I plan to have a moko peha here, a moko kauai and a hiru. But I wanted to see how she would sit for a while before doing those things. Just to make sure I'm not adding them in just for the sake of it, that I'm adding them in to make sure that it's going to enhance her as a person, or it's going to enhance the picture.
Okay, what was the main learning point for all three?
This one was the Dremel. Using the Dremel drill and getting quite confident with it. This one was the wood burner, seeing how the different parts of the hue shell would react to the wood burner, because there's some parts it was quite easy, like here, and there's some parts like on this skin here it's quite different, the reaction. So learning more about the shells and the reaction it makes to different tools. And in her it was, this is kind of a new colour palette for me, using the light colours to express my ideas. In previous pieces it's always quite dark and heavy. This one's sort of the first, not vibrant but kind of light, positive feeling range of colours that I've used. And I'm quite happy with it. And I will probably want to do more pieces like this.
So your overall evaluation of the project?
Mean, I think if we were given more practical time to work on it in class, it probably would have been, probably could have completed more things. I probably would have spent more time on the hair wall if I had better ventilation and more time and a bit more instruction on how to approach hair wall. Because what I've got up to on that point was due to Pat helping. But I would like to, I think my overall feeling about the whole project was pretty cool. It's good to see the research translate into actual art pieces. It was cool. Yeah, sweet.